Well, time now for a debate on the US elections, which, of course, are about just under 100 days away, with voting taking place on the 5th of November. Joining us now are Theryn Bond, who is a Democratic strategist, and Steve Cortes, who has been an advisor to both President Trump's previous presidential bids. And they join me live from Washington, D.C. Good morning to you.
Good
Good
morning.
morning.
Theryn, if I could start with you, what has the Harris campaign got ahead of it this week?
It's going to be a long road. There's a very steep hill to climb, not just this week, but from now until, August at the convention, if she is certified as a Democratic nominee officially, and then all the way to November 5th, she's got to win over union members. She's got to win over young voters, Gen Z, millennials, immigrant voters, folks who have particular thoughts around the war. We've got to see where she really stands on policies and not just those that follow in President Joe Biden's shadow.
There was an article in the Sunday Times yesterday by Owen Stelzer suggesting really that if you look at economic policies, Harris is considerably to the left and more in favor of taxes and public spending than Joe Biden was. Do you think that's fair?
I think we knew going into it that President Joe Biden was what we consider a moderate. He's certainly not extremely progressive. He appeals to a wide array of Democratic voters. And depending on what issue it is, Vice President Kamala Harris could be a little more left than he is. That doesn't surprise me. Economically, we don't know. We don't know where she stands. We don't know what she thinks about key issues. That's the part that all of America is waiting to see.
And Steve Cortes, it does seem a little bit as the Trump campaign has been put off balance, really, by the change of Democratic candidate.
Well, I wouldn't say as off balance, but certainly I think it's surprising to a lot of Americans that the Democrats who claim to be the party of democracy, small d, have decided that they can simply disregard and disenfranchise 14 million voters who voted for Joe Biden. And instead, the oligarchs and power brokers of the Democratic Party, the insiders in the smoke-filled room, essentially, have decided who their nominee is. But look, regardless of how they got there, the fact is, with Kamala Harris, they have a nominee who is far more radical than even Joe Biden and a lot less likable. So at the end of the day, even though I think it's reprehensible the way that they got to this nominee or they're getting there, regardless, as a Republican partisan, I have to say I'm thrilled with having this opponent because I think in many ways she's actually far easier for us to challenge and to take on than Joe Biden even was.
What do you say to that, Theryn?
I don't think so. I think former President Donald Trump was prepared to battle President Joe Biden once again. And it's the rematch that no one wanted to see on either side of the aisle. And so Vice President Kamala Harris coming out of the woodwork really was a shocker to everyone, including people in the Democratic Party. We didn't have an open convention, and we certainly deserved that after President Joe Biden decided to pass the torch. But ultimately, this election will not be decided by people in the Republican Party or even those that are Democratic voters. This is going to be decided in the margins with independent voters and single issue based voters, with who resonates most with those folks.
But you personally would like to have seen an open convention. So in that sense, one can assume that Kamala Harris wasn't your automatic choice for the candidate.
She wasn't. I think she's played in the shadows of President Joe Biden during his entire presidency. She still does a little bit right now. She has yet to distinguish herself as a presidential candidate outside of being the current vice president. We weren't really impressed by what she did in 2020. And that was obvious in how she fared in the polls and when she exited the race. And so people aren't really comparing the differences between 2020 and now, which they should. What have we seen different from her? Not very much. I think we have to be honest in politics, whether it's talking about our party in a good way or a bad way. We've really taken the honesty out of politics, and that's what's missing. Democrats deserved an open convention and a fully open primary in order to truly be Democrats as we proclaim to be.
Adam, I think Theryn makes an excellent point there, which is that there are now more independents in America, self-identified independents, than both political parties combined. right? So a lot of Americans have fled both the Republican and Democratic Party. A lot of Americans are dissatisfied with both. Now, in terms of how are they going to then vote in this election, I believe it will come down primarily, as it normally does, to the economy. And there's just tremendous economic angst in America right now. And that's not my opinion. That's as reflected by every credible survey. For example, CNN just put out a poll that was pretty shocking, I think, to a lot of folks. 39% of Americans say they literally cannot pay their bills, either all or most of the time. I mean, that's an appalling number, showing just how troubling the economy is, how much anxiety there is for regular folks out there. And those people, I think, even if they're not partisan, even if they don't consider themselves America first or wouldn't consider themselves to be MAGA, I believe they're going to vote for a change of administration, a change of management, as it were, for the economy. And they do view Kamala Harris as completely owning the miserable record of Bidenomics. And again, that's not my view, but that's what the polling shows us. So I think she's got a tough road ahead. The media, if you just paid attention to U.S. media, you wouldn't know this because they're fawning over her so vociferously. But the reality is right now, for example, if you look at Real Clear polling averages, which is kind of the gold standard, the reality is right now, and they're narrow leads, but Trump over Harris leads in every single battleground state, which is all that really matters.
I mean, I have to say, I've seen polls showing the opposite. I know,
Well,
I know about, I know about real. I mean, to be honest, from a British perspective, I take even more. I look at American polls with even more doubts than I look at British polls, which is saying something. Anyway, let's not talk about that. Let's talk about the mood. I mean, you say that it appears that Kamala Harris, shares the sort of Bidenomics reputation, but at the same time, she looks like more of a change for the American people, Mr. Cortez, doesn't she, than Donald Trump, who they've already had as president and is coming out with some pretty familiar themes.
Well, listen, that certainly will be their argument. But then if she wants to make that case, then what is that change? And, as you mentioned earlier, she is definitively to the left of Joe Biden, certainly to the left of America. Maybe she's consistent with the voters of California, but not the voters of the rest of America. And as proof of that, again, not my opinion, if we look at GovTrack, which is a statistical analysis firm, independent firm that analyzes legislation and the votes of legislators in the U.S. Congress, when she was last in the U.S. Senate, she was literally the most liberal senator. She was literally the #1 rated leftist senator, to the left of people like Bernie Sanders and even Elizabeth Warren. So if she does want to make the case that she's a change from both Trump and Biden, we're going to expose, well, what is that change? It's even more open borders. It's even higher taxes. It's banning fracking, making energy prices go even higher. So if she does represent change, it's a kind of radical change that simply will not sell to middle America, to places like Pennsylvania and Wisconsin that are going to decide this election.
Theryn Bond, on the immediate agenda, probably before August the 7th, Kamala Harris has to choose a running mate. How important do you think it is who that person is?
100%. I think it's going to make or break her. I think for all the gaps that she has with her individual candidacy, her vice presidential selection could make up the difference, or it could completely tank her campaign. There are pros and cons for all of the contenders, those on the longer list and even those, I guess, perceivably in the top 3. So it's going to be which part of the base is she willing to sacrifice or be less amicable to in order to win the overall race? Not everyone is going to like the pick, but there are some choices that are certainly better than others.
Who would you go for?
Oh, man. Well, first, she wouldn't be my choice at the top of the ticket, to be 100% honest. But if she is indeed the nominee, I think the person who represents the most diverse labels and checklists would be either Governor Andy Beshear or Secretary Pete Buttigieg.
Okay, Steve Cortez, bearing in mind the change on the Democratic side, is J.D. Vance now looking like a bad pick, given his comments about women in particular?
No, I don't think so at all. I'm a big supporter and ardent fan and friend, frankly, of JD Vance, and he represents, I think, in many ways, the future of this America First movement, of the populist movement. His comments regarding women have been, of course, completely manipulated and taken out of context by the corporate media here in the States. The reality is he's pointing out that the Democrat Party has become very much anti-child, and I think that's a reality. And we have a birth rate that is declining rapidly in the United States. And that's something that all of us should be concerned about. And what are the policies that we can institute to incentivize families, to allow families and encourage them to have more children? I mean, I think that's an important national discussion because it's a huge secular change in this country and one that we believe is not welcome. So I think he brings up really important points there. And in terms of connecting with middle America, he's got just an unbelievable background in terms of his story, coming from a very troubled home, from very challenging, poor circumstances, and yet rising to the pinnacle of American business and politics, as made famous in his book and movie, Hillbilly Elegy. I think he's going to connect in a really visceral and significant way with a lot of Americans, especially in those Midwest battleground states, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan.
Adam, could I jump in here really
Yeah.
quick, if you don't mind? I want to be very, very clear about the message we send about women in America, whether they are childless by choice or by unfortunate circumstances. To say that anyone's ties with JD Vance or any other man regarding how childless women in America are responsible for all the bad things is completely irresponsible.